Hi everyone, I'm Sene, Director of an Early Childhood Setting with my team leaders Selma, Felicity and Dennis. We are here to share how COVID-19 has impacted us in our early childhood setting. Sandie will then share her expertise on the importance of well-being in the workforce. Before we start our presentation, we would like to acknowledge the Eora Nation, the owners and traditional custodians of the land where we work, and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. This presentation is about our own experiences at the community-based, not-for-profit early childhood settings in the Sydney metropolitan area. Different to most of the other settings, we reopen at the end of January. Therefore, February is usually the time for us to resettle children who return from their holidays and welcome new children and their families gradually. We started 2020 with the feeling of recovering from the effects of the bushfire and the air pollution that we experienced at the end of 2019. Then COVID-19 hit us. First, we could not believe what the media was reporting. It was unbelievable that a virus could change everything that we know and do this quickly. At the beginning, we received and continually followed the advice from the Department of Education and Department of Health. However, there were so many unknown factors and uncertainties, such as should we continue to keep our early childhood education center open or shut it down to protect the whole community? Then the government announced on the 27th of March that early childhood settings are essential services, so they should remain in operation while primary school, high schools, and universities were closed. My first reaction was anger. Why should we keep early childhood settings open while all other educational institutions are to be closed to protect their students and teachers? Especially when considering the impossibility of practicing the suggested protective behaviors such as social distancing, sneezing, coughing on elbow, etc. How can you keep a 1.5 distance with a crying baby? How can you change nappies or feed or put a child to sleep with this distance? How can you stop a toddler sneezing on your face? Why is the government expecting us to stay open? It did not take long for us to realize that the main reason for keeping early childhood settings in operation was economical. It is sad to state that early childhood in Australia is still viewed mostly as a care service rather than education. All educational institutions were closed, but care services kept in operation so we could look after children while their parents at work or work from home. Another reason was to reduce the reliance on alternative care options such as elderly relatives who are at a higher risk of COVID-19. This was an understandable reason and approach. However, the government's ignorance of the needs of the early childhood workforce and lack of support for this workforce was frustrating. It is a known reality that the early childhood workforce is highly female populated. Some of us are parents with young children. Some of us have carers responsible of our elderly parents. Some of us have health issues and some of us are over the age of 60. When the government made the decision to keep early childhood settings, or in their term childcare in operation, they didn't take any of this into consideration. Now I will pass it to Dennis so she can tell us how COVID-19 has impacted our children. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Denise. As Sene just mentioned, COVID-19 has been challenging us in many different ways this year. It has also been affecting our young children's lives, their learning, and daily experiences at our center. Due to COVID, some important learning opportunities are not available for children. As we all know, social distancing is not applicable to early childhood education settings, so we have to apply some strategies to prevent the transmission of the virus. Therefore, we need to avoid big groupings. For example, instead of putting 6 to 8 chairs around a table, now only 4 children maximum can sit around the table at a time. Also, our children are not allowed to serve their food these days. Before COVID, we used to encourage our children to serve their food or help their peers serve food to practice their self-help skills, their hand-eye coordination and sense of agency, etc. Now, only educators can serve food to children. Our incursions, excursions, and sport classes are on hold as well because of COVID. Now our children have more access to technologies. We have yoga classes, musical shows, ebook, educational children's shows available for children to enjoy. Other than this, our social events and fundraising activities are all cancelled because of the pandemic. We used to have Mother's Day and Father's Day afternoon tea, iftar with families during Ramadan, etc. But now our children cannot physically enjoy the various and multicultural events that used to be a signature of our center. Therefore, in order to engage our children in a more fun and engaging learning program, we planned Fun Week, Book Week, and Science Week, etc. In terms of the learning resources, Play-Doh used to be a must-have setup and plays a very important role in children's free play and our program. Now we cannot provide Play-Doh due to pandemic, and also we cannot have cooking experiences available for children. They can only watch their educators making cakes and cookies, etc. And these are not as often as pre-COVID as well. Despite all these challenges, there were some positive outcomes for children as well. We've noticed that our children now have increasing knowledge about health and hygiene, and now also they become very professional when they wash their hands. Sometimes they come out of the toilet in the middle of washing their hands just to show us that they know how to wash their nails and hands. Our families also have had a significant impact on these positive outcomes. Now Felicity will discuss the impact of COVID on families.
So this change in routine that Denise mentioned, that is limited time for families to spend in the room and centre, both when dropping off and collecting their children, has had a noticeable impact on both children and families in our centre, particularly during the morning drop-off. This generally presents as stress and separation anxiety in children, but it's also seemed to affect parents' emotional regulation as well, with many of them exhibiting stress at having to limit the time spent with their child on arrival and their ability to settle them in that way. The effect has been somewhat cyclical, therefore, in terms of the children's distress impacting their parents and also parental anxiety affecting their child. Educators have, of course, aimed to alleviate this stress and have implemented specific tactics to present a much calmer environment. In my room, in particular, which is birth to 2 years, I found that changing the lighting from overhead lighting to a number of different shaped and coloured lamps around the room seemed to create a calmer atmosphere, along with carefully selected music at an appropriate level. Many of my families have actually commented when they enter that the room does seem calm, and as a result, the children do seem to settle a little quicker. In my room, that is nursery, birth to 2 years, we've also had a fairly unique issue in terms of settling, which is that the vast majority of children in our centre and their families in the toddler and preschool rooms have been at the centre for some time. And so they're therefore familiar with the environment and the routines, the educators and the teachers. Most of the children and the families in the nursery, however, were new to the centre at the beginning of the year. So they went through a standard process that all children and families go through when starting care or starting at a new centre. That is, families take time to become familiar and comfortable with the educators and the teachers, with the routines and the processes and procedures. And of course, their children also need time to become comfortable with educators, the environment, routines, and other children. And so just as many of our children had started to settle around mid-March, COVID came along. And we had a big drop-off in attendance as parents began to work from home, perhaps had a change to their employment situation, reduced hours, forced leave, etc. And as a result, the majority of these children had time away from the centre. I'd say the biggest absence for one of our children was around 5 months, and this child is still struggling to settle back in, and that's more than 2 months after their return. So for most families, it was like having to go back to square one in terms of becoming comfortable and really beginning that settling process all over again. Even for older children and their families in other rooms, the resettling process was quite rough. It was like starting the year all over again, but within a much shorter time frame. I know this was the case for me, as my son is actually in the toddler room, and his distress at resettling after a number of weeks at home with my husband and our older child really impacted me. So I felt the effects as both a parent and a teacher. Now I'll pass over to Sandie.
Hello everybody, my name is Sandie Wong and I'm an Associate Professor at Macquarie University. I'm just going to spend a few minutes talking to you about educator wellbeing, and then Selma's going to talk about the impact of COVID-19 on educator wellbeing at her service. It's important to start off by saying that educator wellbeing includes both the physical and physiological aspects of well-being as well as psychological aspects, and that it's impacted by the context within which educators work as well as the broader social, cultural, political context. It's important to also recognise that educator wellbeing actually matters. It matters, of course, to educators themselves and their families, but it also matters to the children and the families with whom educators work. Educators need to be well in order to provide the high quality pedagogical practices that supports children's learning and development, and also to support families in their parenting. It also it matters to employers. Educators' ill-being is very costly, both in terms of backfill when they're off sick, but also if they leave the service, the costs of attrition and replacing those educators, and also in terms of workers' compensation and things like this. So it also matters to us as a society, both because of the additional costs associated with educators being ill, but also because if we want the long-term outcomes from high quality early childhood education, then we need the educators to be well. There are a number of factors that impact on educator wellbeing. There are individual factors like underlying conditions such as metabolic disease, things like educators' fitness levels, and things like their general mood and temperament as well. There are workplace stressors, so demands of the children and the families that they work with, the relationships that they have with their colleagues, and of course the complexity of the work of an early childhood educator, as well as things like long distance travelling to go to work. These are all things that impact. There are also environmental factors that impact, so whether or not there are employment opportunities where they live and want to work, financial stability, and whether or not there are facilities and supports available to them, such as access to professional development and clinical supervision. There are, of course, real environmental things like the floods, the fires, and what we've all been living through, the global pandemic. There are also social-political factors that impact, things like the industrial laws and the regulations that we work under, and also the things like the esteem within which the profession is held. COVID-19 has impacted on all those levels, so it's likely, therefore, that it's had an impact on educator wellbeing. It certainly has increased demand on educators. There are a lot more things that they have to do in their centres to support children. It's led to a lot of uncertainty in terms of their own employment and what needs to be done and how and why. And also educators having concern with their own health and wellbeing as that of their family as well. So there are a lot of factors. We don't actually know its impact yet, and we are doing some research in that area. But if you are an educator and you are listening to this, please do ask for help if you need it, support others to seek help should they need it, and be kind to one another. And I'll hand over now to Selma. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Sandie. Hi, everyone. I would say COVID-19 did not affect our professionalism in any way. As a team, we could keep following the rules and requirements before and after COVID-19 and provide high-quality care and education to the children under our care with big smiles on our faces, because it is expected that as an educator, you should always be cheerful, be friendly and attentive. However, apart from our professional behavior, we all had lots of unanswerable questions, such as, will I be able to keep my job? What if we have a child who carries the virus without any signs and symptoms? What if the government decides to shut down the ECE settings? How am I going to pay my bills? And so on and on. Those questions had been a part of our everyday life during those times. So, how do we cope COVID-19 at our centre? Our staff had opportunities to get tested and use their sick leaves until they got the result back. Educators will be able to take leaves, and priorities have been given to the ones who were considered to be in the high-risk group for COVID-19 or who have considerable concerns about their health. For example, staff with health conditions such as asthma. We also shared rotated shifts. For instance, while some of us had been working, the others had been on leave. We eliminated the overload of work on educators by setting everything into survival mode. For instance, by limiting the paperwork and documentations, combining the groups of children during certain times of the day, etc. We were therefore able to keep up with the new updated requirements. We also shared motivational and funny quotes and small surprises like a basket of fruit in the staff room, lunch with a table full of food, and so on, in order to soften the atmosphere of COVID-19, at least for a little while, and keep our whole team motivated. Lastly, when I thanked one of our parents for bringing morning tea for our educators, she said, "You guys deserve more than that. You are legends." It felt really good to be recognized. Yes, we are legends. Thank you for listening to our presentation.